Joseph was born in Birmingham, England, of Irish parents. He is a poet, author, journalist and reviewer, and his writings and poems have appeared in lots of journals and indeed anthologies in Ireland, the UK, Europe and the United States. And he has also had his work broadcast pretty widely on radio and television. He's a past winner of the Patrick Kavanagh Award and has been a shortlisted entrant in the Hennessy Award and was chosen for the Poetry Ireland introduction series also. He has received an Arts Council Bursary here in Ireland, and he's also the recipient of those very sought after Cork County Council Arts Bursaries. Huge achievement in itself. He has been visiting writer at the Irish Writers Centre in London, the Irish Writers in London Summer School, and also writer in residence in that beautiful Heinrich Boll cottage on Achill Island, another enviable posting. His first collection of poetry was called Slipping Letters Beneath the Sea and was published by Doghouse in 2008. His second book, The Song at Your Back Door, is a meditation on identity and place and was published by Collins Press in 2010. It was selected, some of you may remember, as an RTE Book on One. His third book, An Unscheduled Life, is a collaboration with Brian Whelan, the artist, and was published in 2012 by Agenda Editions. And he has a CD of poetry also, which I have heard, and traditional music called Men Without Names, which toured around not only Ireland, I understand, Joseph, but Paris and other centres over the last 18 months. Men Without Names was funded by the Cork County Arts Department and was released last year. His work has been anthologised, as I've said, in an anthology called Off the Wall, published by Marino and edited by Niall McMonigal. Another one published by Daedalus, edited by Eva Burke, called Landing Places. And also in the Sunday Miscellany anthology. His journalism, as opposed to his poetry, has appeared in Ireland and the UK, in the Irish Left Review, in the Press Gazette and in the Irish Post. And he's written a weekly column for the Irish Post since 1999. When you hear his voice, you will, I think, appreciate that he has a singular voice, and Paula Meehan is the person who is credited with saying that he is also a singular voice in Irish poetry. So I ask you to give a warm welcome, please, to Joseph Horgan.
Appreciate that. Make me sound absolutely great. So. I'll give a look to it. I'll start off with a couple from my first collection. I find reading's a bit like writing a poem itself. That starts off with a huge list and then winnow it down and winnow it down and winnow it down. It's a bit like writing a poem. It's usually a vast amount of lines and then I chop away at it. And one day dream, just a blank white page. Well, you know, poetry collections are hard enough to sell, I don't think that would be. This is called Asbestos Dreams. My mother and father immigrated to the UK in the 50s and a kind of hard life for the Irish who left in those days. And I try sometimes in my poetry to pay tribute to the people. This is about my father and some of the work he had to do when he arrived in the UK. Asbestos Dreams. Each night I died. Each morning I awoke as a white ghost. The lullaby of the furnace silent. I fed the fire with rags and coal that was dug by other sweating men. Through the hours of night I worked at chemical speed so that later I could steal sleep. Curled against the heat, a snow of ash falling silently upon me, toxic parachutes floating. Each night I died. Each morning I wore a shroud of the finest asbestos cloth. I've lived in Ireland. I moved to Ireland, came back to Ireland in 1999. So I experienced the boom and then the collapse. And one time in the height of the boom, I was down. We took the kids out for the day, we ended up in a school down in West Cork. Took the kids to the playground. We went away to somewhere else, took the kids to the playground for a run around. And it was packed, completely full, the playground. But I was the only parent there because I suddenly realised that all the other adults there with children were au pairs and nannies. And made me think about an earlier generation of Irish, like my mother who left. And this is called To Those Who Have Inherited a Country. If we'd known, we'd have stayed. We could have lingered outside your electronic gates, built your crowded motorways instead of theirs. You would have had no need of East European nannies when there were so many slips of girls slipping away, leaving home. If we'd only known, we'd have stayed. My poems are all quite short actually, and they just kind of end abruptly. So I just ran out of steam and I just stopped. I've collaborated a lot with other artists. I find it, writing is quite a solitary activity, and I just find it a lot more interesting. Working with people in different disciplines. I bought a book out with a painter, Brian Whelan. I actually don't read from it very often because it's kind of, it'd be like singing without music or something. It doesn't seem to. But there are a few that work. So myself and Brian from the same background. Brian grew up in London with Irish parents, and he kind of paints that place that we came from. I think one of the other things about our experience was that growing up with Irish parents in the UK meant that it was always close enough for us to come back. So we came back every summer for 6 weeks, but we were increasingly coming back to it. The idea of it was a vanished island that my parents had come from. So they always harked back to something that didn't exist anymore. And I actually find that I'm mirroring that myself now, in that I hark back to a kind of Irish community in Britain that has, because of time, has caught up with them. Kind of doesn't really exist anymore either. And coming from that immigrant life, most of us grew up in inner city areas, working class areas and urban places, and this one poem I tried to pay tribute to that kind of experience. It's called City Centre. I have the old city in me and factories of the hand. I have smoke-fogged pubs at the end of corners of terraced houses. Shift workers still keep their own licence and the short walk home in the dark. I have the unofficial city in me and places only known to the city. A life on public transport is nothing to be ashamed of. I have the city in my lungs and I've had my moments. Keep on keeping on, I said. If it takes a year, we're going to last a year. I have the city in my hands, but I wouldn't glance at half this stuff you buy. This emporium of skin. Everything for sale. Everything must go. Everything has a price. Everything, everything, everything. I have the city raining past me day after day, and though I have no weather in here, I have everything else. I have the city in here, and the unofficial city, and the city in my lungs, and the city raining past me day after day after day. I found, I don't know whether, I don't think I was doing it deliberately anyway, it's some kind of attempt at balance, but most of my poems tend to be about a kind of working class male experience. So when I do readings, I dig out a few that you mean them to try and pretend that I've got a real balance. Again, this one's really short, so it's called How Irish Women Survived. will not give up on this drawing of you, I said. And you said, we both know, son, you cannot do it. And there is only a trace, a scent of cruelty in your words. After many years, the city rose in you, so that Irish cousins thought they might have an English art. In truth, your voice paced back and forth, not caged but confused, restless in both places. I believe I know what you look like, I said, but I cannot draw you if you will not sit still. Also, another collaboration a few years ago there. I'm looking for another publisher at the moment. I've got another collection doing the rounds. I sometimes think maybe publishers should steer clear of it though, because two of them closed down after a while. Collection. It's not a good thing to advertise when you're trying to find someone. I brought out a collection with an English poet, Antony Owen, who's from the Midlands as well, he's just down the road from where I grew up. It's called The Year I Loved England, and it's about, again, very much about, well, I grew up in a very multicultural city, in a very multicultural area, very working class area, after a kind of post-industrial city, after the industries had been closed down by the Tories. And one of the things I wanted to do in this poem was pay tribute to the kind of place where I grew up, because it was in an inner city area, it was messy, it was, you know, I wouldn't like to give anyone the impression that we were skipping in and out of each other's houses and it was joyous, but the mix of people there functioned really well, and whilst there were racial tensions, I think the whole idea now of multiculturalism is coming under such attack that I wanted to go to those places where that are ignored by poetry as well, are ignored, and try and make something almost mythical about it. I came across a painting by Mark Chagall, I think, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, and it's called Above the Town, and he did these fantastic paintings of his kind of humble life in Eastern European Jewish towns and villages, and the one that really caught my eye was it's a couple kind of holding each other and they're floating above the houses. It's absolutely beautiful, and I tried to make something of that of the rather grim places where I come from. It's called Address. All the houses on our street are upside down, and people fly above the chimneys. They are falling into the sky. They are not from here anyway. Not one of them is from here anyway. Who is from here anyway? The people in the sky are falling up into India, Pakistan, Ghana, Nigeria, St. Kitts and Ireland. They are landing on their heads. They are from here every way. Every one of them is from here somewhere. Where is from here anyway? All the streets near our house are downside up, and chimneys fly above the people. They are sky, and they are flying. In the city now where I grew up, Malala lives. You know, Malala, the girl who took on the Taliban for women's education, and got a 16-year-old daughter myself, and I mean, you know, having heroes is tough when you're an adult, but I think something like that is so inspiring, and the idea that she's now in the city where I grew up and is living her life there kind of inspired me to think of the other people there, the other kids from all the different backgrounds who grew up in that place as well. So this poem's roughly about that kind of thing. It's called I Think of All the Moons I Have Seen. I am a girl, a 16-year-old girl, and one day I will be a woman. I will be a woman. So I spit pomegranate seeds. I spit pomegranate seeds, though I have lived my whole life in this city. 16 years in this city, my whole life. And I turn to the window and make a recording in an older way. Turn to the window and see my own face, my 16 years. And rain hits the window, rat-a-tat-tat, like rain hitting the window, rat-a-tat-tat. And my face is smiling, my whole face, and my beautiful life. I'll just finish off now with a couple that have been published and broadcast, but they're not in the collections yet. Just in case any publishers out there desperate for they're just a couple of, they're quite similar poems in a way. I'm just trying, to I think like I like to find poetry in. I live down in West Cork and it's absolutely beautiful and the natural environment is stunning. It's a privilege, you know, to live there, and I have written a prose book about just the glories and natural beauty there. But sometimes I like to find poetry in. I prefer to find poetry in the bookies or the pub or listening to people talk nonsense, and people themselves are poems, you know. I was coming up. This was actually in Dublin. Actually, I was on a bus in Dublin, and one of the characters in it I overheard, and then the rest were just kind of, I thought, different people I'd come across in that kind of public setting. It's called Though When They Catch My Eye. I like the desperate for fags people. I like that we're all on this bus together and that no one minds I'm writing a poem. I even like the one who's threatening to find a fictional gangster from a television show and get someone fucking sorted out. I admit, I even like her. I like the philosopher who sits at the front and says, "You've got to have a laugh, driver," at the end of every sentence she utters. And I believe she has empirically tested that proposition and found it to be true. I like her, maybe, best of all. I like the beautiful boy who's going into town on that first date, sweeping his phone and sweatshop finery as if getting updates from the stock market of his inner life, toying in his mind and hands with changing his status. We all love him a little bit. I like that the desperate for fags people and the philosopher and the driver and the beautiful boy and the poet are showing the true existence of society, and that we are all genuinely in this together. Whilst hiring hitmen, laughing, and maybe, I don't know, having sex are all possible on a public transport that is, after all, the acme of social living in one place or another. I like all of this very much. just finish off with this one now. It's actually about my best friend. He's actually, I've done it a few times and I feel like I've made him up, but he's a real person. I'm glad I don't live with him, but he is like the poem, you know. He told me that he had a 50th birthday party a few months ago, which I didn't make. I saw him afterwards, and he told me that he printed the poem off and read it, you know, thing, which I was, you know. So, because I'm a poet and I'm really vain and egotistical, I asked him how it went down, and he said he was so drunk he had no idea. Well, I imagine it went down. It's called I Love a Man. I love a man who drinks whiskey for breakfast, and you have to be a gifted kind to love a man who drinks whiskey for breakfast, and write a poem for a man who drinks whiskey for breakfast. Imagine flowers and a midnight dance with a man who drinks whiskey for breakfast, who has so much of the cosmos inside him that he drinks whiskey for breakfast, whose love is the love of a bear in the high forest, drinking whiskey for breakfast, who patrols the snow line in a vest and pants, drinking whiskey for breakfast, who lies but is not dishonest, is true, and drinks whiskey for breakfast, who would gather the lost to him in laughter as he drinks whiskey for breakfast, making them all feel gifted enough to love a man who drinks whiskey for breakfast. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. And now I have the great pleasure, added pleasure, of introducing Afric McGlinchey. Afric's The Ghost of the Fisher Cat, which I had in my pocket. I'm just going to. Are there copies available, Afric? Or somebody has it, yeah. It's just why I want to handle a copy is because it is fresh. It's been released in the last few days, almost the last few hours, and there it is. This is her second collection published by Salmon Press, and it follows her much acclaimed debut collection, The Lucky Star of Hidden Things, which was published in 2012. That particular book, The Lucky Star of Hidden Things, introduced readers to Afric's colourful African heritage, complete with a page-length glossary of words from the original Afrikaans, Shona, and even Pidgin Shona, for such things as centipede, xylophone, and marijuana. We were treated in that first book to a feast of the senses, but invited also into a vulnerable personal world of loss and upheaval and compassion. And, like all great books in any genre, the strongest impression one was left with was the distinctiveness of the language, served in this case by lightning speed of thought and a canny hand in crafting dramatic and unlikely associations. The language in that first book works tirelessly throughout it, like the wind that whoops and fleers and the sleet that skitters over the whitening ground. To quote her poem, Do Not Lie to a Lover, which had won Afric the Hennessy Emerging Poetry Award the previous year in 2011. Afric grew up in Ireland and Africa, mainly Zimbabwe, where her father still lives. She studied journalism in Rhodes University and English literature at the University of Cape Town. She has also lived in Paris, London, and Spain. She's recipient of a Faber Academy Fellowship, is a Pushcart nominee, and winner of the Northern Liberties Poetry Prize in 2013. She's a workshop facilitator. She reviews poetry for the online journal Sabotage and reviews fiction occasionally for the Irish Examiner. Her poetry has been translated into Irish, Italian, Polish and Spanish. Afric lives in West Cork, where she has recently been poet in residence at Uillinn, the wonderful new West Cork Arts Centre. In describing her perspective as a poet, Afric says that she is more of a witness than a participant. Her unique transcontinental life experience holds a fascination for all of us who have come to her work, either by chance or by design. Speaking in interview, she once said, "Interestingly, I only began writing seriously when I returned to Ireland in 1999, when I discovered the Munster Literature Centre and started attending workshops. Here is where I am creatively stimulated, where I read and study the craft, but my image base is strongly influenced by my years in Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and time spent in Malawi, Mozambique, and Namibia. I also return regularly, so both places influence my writing." Afric's second book, From Salmon, appears, as I say, today in public for the first time. Hot from the hatchery, as it were, can resist that. And so Afric and I have agreed that it too deserves a little introduction. The epigraph from Sugarev is worth noting, and the shadows grew denser, more visible and solid than the real things. Because this is what actually happens in this book. There is a sense of going deeper towards things more substantial even than the recorded experience that formed the basis for her first book. The poet's dominant setting has moved from that of South Africa to Paris, and away from the poet's direct lived experience into realms of the imagined. The Paris we move through is a historical and geographical hybrid. The cat motif is a brave one to adopt, with strong poetic antecedents, but this new entrant is agile and bold enough to assert its own distinctive, if ghostly, presence, as the title and the opening poem suggest. The music of the collection, to borrow the words of the poet, is so intricate and astonishing that it often takes us unawares from the familiar to the abstract. A facet of Afric's hand is the way she can achieve enigma through the use of crystal clear imagery, a kind of surreal imagism, where the interplay of image and association confounds easy ascription. Such works are deliberately puzzling behind a guarded reality that's well worth divining. Another feature of her style is the enviable first line. "I have a cat that sharpens her scent on men." Cats compose the dark. Even in cities, there are places to be alone with drizzle and roses. Near the estuary, silt xylophones over shale and pebble. And imaginary balconies seek 50 poplars. This last first line is from a remix of an Ilya Kaminsky poem, where Afric has skillfully recycled every word of the original. Afric is equally forensic in the few conventionally narrative poems in the collection, some of which lack no ambition, and where she allows the detailed action to tell its own backstory. There are also poems here which are alarmingly simple, like Leap, which registers the big bang of first love, and Some Things Are Hard to Shake Off, where tradition hoodwinks belief. The book falls into 5 sections of almost identical length. The final phase brings a safe landing of both the ghost cat and the poet, a sense of the daring flight having been worth it, the landing place accommodating all within a firm circumference of belonging. This second collection by Afric deserves to be read and appreciated widely, and I now ask you to welcome its author.
I'm just so mortified, I don't even want to begin to read anything on that. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, John. And actually, there are so many people to thank, but as there's a time limit, and I don't think, how do I set this clock? I'll just watch it. I will just limit it to a grateful thanks to Pat Cotter of the Munster Literature Centre for inviting me to read, and to say that he's been a fantastic champion of not just me, but all the Cork poets and Munster poets for at least a decade anyway, since I've been back in Ireland, and I don't know what we'd do without him. Poetry would be very much the poor without the Munster Literature Centre, and Jen as well, and Emily when she's here, and you know, Southward and this fantastic festival, so thanks very much to Pat for that. And I have to, did that book vanish again? Yes, I just have to thank Michael Ray, my partner, for this fantastic cover, which actually triggered the whole collection. There's a story behind that, but I just want to say that I love it. I was thrilled. And I think I'll stop there. I'll just start reading. So one of my themes is overcoming disturbances and kind of transcending them even sometimes. So my first poem is the opening poem, Cat Music. A drowning is lifted from a rain barrel, dark as a slick of oil, stripped with a blade, organs separated from fat and manure, soaked overnight in alkaline water, scraped once more, then stirred through sulfuric fumes, rolled into elongated strings, attached to an instrument, ready for horsehair to stroke into music, so astonishing and intricate and astonishing, you would think the animal had arisen. And I'm going to do Leap, the one that you see on your arm, really simple. As the collection was triggered by a kind of medieval Parisian cat, most of my poems are located in that place and kind of era, mainly because I was trying to, I couldn't fix myself in Ireland yet. I feel I'm a bit like Joe. I've lived as an Irish person in Zimbabwe, and I'm kind of here as Zimbabwean in Ireland, and so there's that sense of dislocation all the time. So I just didn't feel ready to settle, and I loved that word. If you're talking about the accent settling, I always sound wrong wherever I am. So anyway, so I've used the cat motif as well to thread some of these poems together. So it's called Leap, and there's an epigraph by Homer Simpson. In this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics. He said that basically when Lisa invented a machine where heat increased with time. Let's say a cat leaps, and I follow, lifting my feet the way my sister taught me into the big bang of first love. I am still soaring, then land, soft as a cat, on a red brick ledge among African violets, his hands on a pair of newly found planets. Then a mouth, cruising skin, hatching a nipple, so blushingly unexpected, I burn for decades. I'm kind of tortured by insomnia a lot of the time, and in fact last night I only got to sleep at 5, so I'm a bit wrecked. But the upside of that is I get to do a lot of dreaming. I get a lot of REM time, and then I wake up again. So I get quite disturbed, these dreams on the whole. But anyway, here's a poem out of that. This is called Night's Three Faces. 1. Cats compose the dark, wrapped in the weight of night devilment. They chew on the tail of a key of flames, fire system, immutable skies. There is violence too in the camber of voices around the weight of indiscretions. Cars reverse like a tongue, a snake cloud, so much to hide. Every night the kingdom comes. 2. The lyric river is calling as if the word fog were full of groping shadows. Rain in the dark, harmonic. Birds gather oil, sticky and slow. One flicks up a clot that clips a man cycling past us as we sit cocooned in a hot car on the pier. How long can a drowning cat struggle in a Hessian sack? But this is just a long night in a room. 3. Trees bucking, throwing their limbs to the sky, full of the lungs of a 2-year-old girl hoisted onto a father's shoulders, seeing the world from that towering height. From here, forests can foretell their own forced breath, filled with the sting of a chainsaw. I've spent so many hours streaking past the screaming silence packed below me. so as I said, I had a very disturbed childhood in that I can count 18 houses that I lived in by the time I reached the age of 18. And also then I got married, and somehow that continued, and I was married for 17 years, lived in 17 houses. So home was never really something that was anchored for me. I actually quite miss it. But anyway, so this poem is called Blink. They stream past me like phantom birds, all the houses. The first African one, a hammerkop, all messy crest. Another, a paradise flycatcher. The third, a heron. Sometimes they brush the edge of wild bush or a silvery river, warming their tails in the sun till the vanishing. One for each year of a migratory childhood. Long corridors, tall steps, cold rooms, glass roofs. Across a hemisphere, some standing on lawns bright as sugar, dressed up like mannequins, temporary playthings before another recrossing. Tucked at the end of a long cul-de-sac, one comes close to what you call home, close enough to look into the glossy pellet of a sun-struck eye, see the malachite amber blur. But it slips through my fingers, and once again I am left with nothing but a flickering. In review of my last collection, Tom...
Can you talk a little louder, I think?
Oh, right, can you hear me at last? Okay, I'll try.
Sure. You have a lovely song.
Okay,
just to make sure they hear the music.
I know. Anyway, in a review of my last collection, Tom McCarthy noted that I had no rain. No rain in my collection. So I'm going to read this one for him. It's called Holocene. Wolf rain dragging down the mountain, or kinetic beating up the alley wall, or bad friend electrocuting streets, or slipping like cat fur from your shoulders, or slant subversive against a torso, or rain that addresses you with violence, spear thrown from Zulu skies, or a glacial rebound, copper-threaded, or thick like vertebrae, or sliding like licorice down a throat, or composed like wine, full-bodied, or body-bagged, ready for a requiem. Actually, that's quite solid. I lived in pre-independent Zimbabwe, and I during the Civil War there, and I knew a soldier, and he maybe I shouldn't need to go. Okay, so I'm going to read this one. I'm always interested in I'm attracted to both the clarity of a linear narrative and also the sort of the intrigue of more disturbed narratives. And actually we were doing one I'm doing Darren Rhys Jones's workshop, which is absolutely fantastic. And we were looking at C.D. Wright's poem, and so I totally gravitated towards that. So I'm kind of, you get both of these in this collection, both clear and more kind of obscure poems. And this one's called Sonnet in B Major. Sway, everybody, even the horse that shies, the child on paper, drawing, green easy until flummoxed. Do magic like feral creatures turning quick to a language, cold air awakening. Coins are still legitimate, but not quiet anymore. A wet black semi-quaver opening up the frantic eye of an arbitrary Icarus. Oh, these bells. But I digress. If we must die ingloriously, let's first rise up like snakes from the monumental pit. We don't get back for a second year. Speed's got a nerve, and no time strident bunch of followers. all these criminal acts, move the iceberg, or lose the Titanic, everything. Durin was talking last night about writing political poetry, and we've been looking at the Caroline Forché's poem, The Colonel, and we've also been considering the ethical aspect of writing about poetry that you know, say for example the refugee experience we're looking at the moment. And you know, if you're not directly affected by that disaster, do you have a right to write about that subject? So it's always a tricky one, but I feel, because I've had this migratory life, and also actually I have to say when I was in London I did experience some racism. They assumed I was Zimbabwean because I had just come in from there, and I was teaching at a language school there, and there were 18 teachers in the room, all English, and a lot of anti-Irish comments came up. It was quite a jolt, and so it really put me, I really was on the receiving end of the feeling, and the only two people who actually stood up for the Irish in that entire room was a Scottish German woman and a Northern Irish man, so they were my friends. And also I lived in Golders Green, and you know, one day somebody driving by threw an egg at me and it landed in my back and cursed me for being Jewish and get the hell out and all that. And down went the yolk down my back. So part of this poem that I'm going to read now is true, but it's also the whole migrant, you know, I'm kind of pulling in a few stories here. So this is called I is Not Always Me. And there's an epigraph by Arthur Rimbaud, Je hais un autre. I take 4 trains each way through bleary light, hide from the city noise inside my head, where there's only silence, or the memory of her cello. My blood's grown thick, my body moves more slowly. That first day, some racist in a drive-by aimed an egg. It hit my back. He chased the car, caught up at the lights, and threw a punch. The stairwell to our bedsit reeks with piss. Paul is crammed with bicycles. Once I cycled to the river, sat all day and stared. Pebbles, floating foliage, strange fish. He roared at me when I returned, thought he'd have to have it dredged. Holds me when I wail at night. I miss my mother. He tells me to pretend she's dead. They come from everywhere, the others. Syria, Peru, Fiji, Senegal. Today we look at colours. Our teacher gestures to the window, but of course the sky is rarely blue. I'm an immigrant, she says, like you. And this, she points to the screen, a southern ocean. This is blue. She tells us about blue movies, how blue's also an emotion. In Advanced, we talk about erosion, cliffs giving way, landing in the sea. I think of how a foreign language percolates your own until its idioms even permeate your dreams. That's not just acquisition, but erosion too. It's only when I follow the slow river and the first real sun of summer kisses fire to its skin that I remember. I went to a dinner party once where this guest was abominably rude to the hostess. He basically just completely ignored her. And I had my own instinct about why that was. And I also I wanted to write her to give her a voice because she was completely crushed and was completely shriveled. You watched her physically shrivel at the table. So anyway, so this is. I'm also playing with voices a lot in this collection, and so there are 2 voices here. So, l'esprit d'escalier. 1. Flossie, let's put the bomb inside the Trojan horse. Our lives are just coffee tables, tattered rugs. We could find the velvet beneath new petals. Your smile, that cherry lipstick wave. When I say let's, between words and words, flesh might be outraged, but I promise not to go into Twittersphere, all that gibberish. This is just to say, Flossie, I love your alabaster skin. 2. Al. A snake rising repeatedly is only to be mocked for its dandruff and over-shiny shoes. The only bitter I'll consider is dark chocolate grated over a lemon drizzle cake made by the skinniest man this side of the lush carpet, who has more than words in his seduction closet. 3. Ah, Flossie, cut me some slack. Give me the late afternoons, low thumping inside your ribs. It's good to stand at the top of the stairs for a different view. Maybe Instagram, though on the whole, I prefer to keep away from social media. I don't sleep much, hyperkinetic perhaps. Or this, the way electric currents animate the rose under your skin. What else could we blow up? 4. Al, long before you mentioned bombs in horses, you began the death throes. Oh, you smile, but at the corners of your eyes, I look for daggers. You may as well ask me to emigrate to Mars with a preacher man. I see you for what you are, your small game, which is to say, your fishing line will never reach so much as a thread of water. 2, I was going to do 3 more, but I'm looking at the time. Okay, I might manage 3. Okay, here's the cat motif again. Have I time for 3?
Yes.
I have. Okay. Well, at least no one will be able to say that my collection isn't themed. Okay, there's an epigraph with this one as well, by Matthew Hollis. I have a cat now. It comes in, it goes out. And I nearly didn't put that in because Michael said, Afric, that's such a good line, you can't find that at all. I tried. So, he can't sit still. Kept in too long, and he's up and down with the incomprehensible leapings of a branded creature. He walks very fast, vibrations casting bait in various directions. Not that I'm saying he's hunting. It's just that in this state, he's unreachable, as though an invisible glass surrounds his agile body. At other times, I could walk right through him. All matter is merely image, after all. In any case, he isn't there, but squalling on some rooftop or springing from the highest tree, his only landing gear, ingenuity. The best approach is an open door. He eventually comes in. There's 3. I'll see how I do. Okay, there's a word. I nearly didn't do this poem because there's a word in it I really don't like. And you know, why do you put a word in you don't like? So I kept taking it out and putting it in. And the reason I left it in is because it disturbs me, and also because it's kind of on a matter of hair, and it gives me the sound of. Anyway, so this is called, and I have to say the inspiration from this poem comes from several sources, one being a book called The Token Madness, which is written by a friend of mine who's a journalist in Africa. And there was a scene in that which triggered this. Anyway, you might recognise the scene. And also that open letter that was written to Jackie, what's her name? J.K. Rowling. I don't know if you heard. There's an image out of that letter I have in here too. And I've written it in 5 acts, which is kind of like a Greek tragedy. Karen Blixen epigraph. God and the devil are one. Did I tell you it's called Contact? Contact. God and the devil are one. Chopper's genuflection. A wolf disturbs the air. Clansmen and women offer fruit. A wolf disturbs a calabash, spills water. A wolf, white walls, a flare. 2. A mob, Kalashnikovs and rocks. He cowers in a corner, hands seize on splintered glass. A looming face, teeth yellow stained from chewing chud, spring loaded spittle, screaming hate. 3. The sea receives more bodies, lays them on a beach. Crossings lead to razor wire, new fences. 4. Boycotts and defences dance like pirouettes, a paintbrush. 5. At an army base, I believe he had no faith. The chaplain's agitated. But we've got to say a prayer before we zip the bag. It's always been the way. I'm going to do one. I'm torn now to do. I don't think I can do both. I'll give you a choice. Villanelle or my last poem?
Last
Last poem. Okay. Okay. This started off as a completely different poem. Actually, and it nearly didn't make the collection at all. It just kind of wriggled in at the last minute. But anyway, so it's called, and thank you so much for listening, for coming and for listening. This is called Ode to an Itinerant Cat. You've begun to follow me home. Aren't strays usually found in alleys and quays? At the late night bus stop, aren't you the fleet shadow? Père Lachaise catacombs have a few too. I'll bet they are within your radius, can see you communing with ghosts. Your harlequin eyes have their secrets. I've heard that cats are the ultimate alchemists, comforters for the ill and forgetful, attendants at elsewheres. No wonder, for some, cats are sacred. I'm still cautious. Your moods shift in an instant from winding around ankles to spit, dagger eyes, and drumdry hackles, tail a flickering warning. But we're getting there. And now, here, my almost familiar. It's taken a year, slipping at last into my lap, like rain spill into a river. Your purring, electric as fences, vibrating through skin. Thank you.